Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Mayborn Mentor Event here in the spring of 2021. We're so excited to have you all here, and we have a really great panel today. I'm going to pass it off to Trent Walters, board member for the Mayborn School of Journalism. Trent.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today. Excited for another one of our Mayborn Mentor panels. And the point of this opportunity is to basically connect students with the industries that they want to be in and help them understand, help you all understand what's going on in the actual industry space, some of the things you can be looking out for, some of the things you should be thinking about as you are making that transition from college to the working professional world. So hopefully they're helping you bridge that gap. So we're excited about today's session. And we've got two fantastic panelists here who I'm going to let introduce themselves as we start talking about social justice today. All right. So I'm going to start with Rebecca. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Jessica, you can follow.
Thanks, Trent. I appreciate being invited to this panel. I think it's very important to talk about social justice. Yes, I'm Rebecca Aguilar. I have been a reporter now almost 40 years. In June, it will be my big celebration. I did 28 years in television news in like 6 or 7 TV newsrooms. I'm now a freelance reporter, so I do TV, radio, digital, print. You have to do it all today. And I was recently elected president-elect of the Society of Professional Journalists, happened to be the first woman of color and the first Latina to head this organization in more than 100 years. So I welcome this conversation today, and thank you again for the invite. Jessica?
Hi, my name is Jessica Yanez, and I am a Mayborn alum, and I graduated with in public relations, but now I host a podcast called the Wine and Chisme Podcast, which is a podcast I created to amplify voices across communities of color. So it's very focused on Latino, African American, Asian, just all across the communities of color. And I get to drink wine as we do it. So that makes it fun. But also an additional purpose that I found is really highlighting Latino vintners. So those are Latino-owned wine brands that there's 11,000 wineries in the United States, and less than 80 are owned by Latinos. So what I've created is virtual wine tastings that really highlight those vintners, because oftentimes when people think of the Latino community, they think of us working the land, not owning the brands. So I've really focused on trying to change that narrative. So thank you.
That's awesome. And before we start asking you all questions, I want Becky to have a chance to introduce herself. She's on the line as well.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Becky Kimbrough, and I am currently serving as the VP of Marketing and Brand for the San Antonio Spurs and Spurs Sports and Entertainment. Yeah, Spurs fan in the house.
Yes, San Antonio.
Yeah. So you're familiar with some of the other brands in the SSNE portfolio, which include the Austin Spurs, our G League development team, San Antonio FC, and then we also manage the building where the Spurs play. And we've got a foundation that we work with as well. So I've been in this role for about 3 years. Came from the baseball side of things, where I worked in a similar capacity as VP of Marketing for the Texas Rangers. And then prior to baseball, spent a couple seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. And then prior to getting into the team side of things, worked on the agency side for almost 10 years. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm also a proud Mayborn alum and working on the board of advisors. Excited to share perspectives on social impact and social justice from the brand side of things, and excited to be here with Jessica and Rebecca.
Fantastic.
By the way, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I do want to mention that I am also an alum of Mayborn. I got my master's there in 2019. Thank you very much to Mayborn. I was one of the Mayborn scholars, and very honored to go to that, to UNT. It was a wonderful experience.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to start with the first question, and then Dean Miller and I are just going to kind of go back and forth asking different questions and maybe even asking you all to provide some additional context around some of the answers to some of the initial questions. So should be a good time. All right. Let's start with our first question. And we'll just kind of go in the same order that we went as far as the introductions and go from there. So everyone, your thoughts on what does social justice mean within the walls of your organization or position, and how are you acting upon it?
So I guess I'll go first.
Right. Go ahead.
Social justice, I look at it as different kind of movements out there. Understand I grew up also in the 60s and 70s. I was a kid in the 60s. So my parents were civil rights activists, migrant rights activists, union leaders. So there was always a social theme in the family. And it continues today, of course. But when I became a journalist, my job was only to inform the people of the events going on there, whether it is Black Lives Matter or whether it's the issue of children on the border right now. There's a social justice element to everything. My job as a journalist is to report both sides. For example, Black Lives Matters, whether it involves the police departments, whatever is happening, it's both sides. Whether it's the immigration issue, it's both sides, the people who are anti and pro. That's my job. I always tell people, probably deep inside, of course, my parents were activists, that's in my heart. But when I chose to be a journalist, I chose to tell a balanced story. Unless I'm a paid commentator where I can do a slant or an opinion writer. But fortunately, I'm in the position where I, get to cover both sides. Sometimes it's not that easy because I'm the daughter of undocumented workers turned green card holders, and one became an American citizen. My father died early. So it's not easy, but that's my job. So I hope that answers it.
That's great. I think we'll probably get into some more of that balance, the delicate balance that you have to manage as we continue the conversation. So thank you. That's really, really good. All right, Jessica.
Well, as a podcaster who focuses on stories that come from communities of color, I don't need to be balanced. I don't, because it's my platform. But I think it's very important that I continue to stay informed of what's happening, because sometimes I do need to question the guests in regards to, well, what about this or what about this, and play a little bit of devil's advocate to continue the conversation, because I think it's so important. As coming from, I grew up in San Diego, and that's where I'm at now. So I come from a border city, and my grandpa used to bring people over from the border, and he used to work the fields and the citrus and avocado fields. So I have a very deep connection in regards to that. But I have family who has also kind of forgotten where we come from. So I think it's very important to continue to stay informed of all of these things that are going on, whether it's Black Lives Matter, kids in cages, what's happening within the Asian community right now. Because ultimately, our voices together are much stronger collectively than they are individually. So it's very, very important when we talk about social justice that we're not just talking about one specific aspect, that we inform ourselves of all of the variations of social justice and how we can bring our voices together to create change. I hope that answered.
Yeah, great. Very great. Becky.
Yeah, so this is, it's an interesting question, and I'm going to answer this from the brand perspective. I think, and that's what kind of part of the beauty of this panel is that we have someone from the journalism side, someone who's a podcaster who kind of has, that perspective, and then I'll kind of take the brand role. And for us, social justice within our organization at SS&E means everything to create an environment of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And, we have the ability on the brand side to do two things. One, talk with our staff, our fans, our employees, and everybody that we consider, Spurs family, to understand their perspective. And then two, turn around and stand up for what we believe is right. And I think it's been interesting over the years that you've seen this shift in what used to be called cause marketing, we'll say, into a more authentic approach from brands choosing to stand for specific values or advocate for specific causes. And I think that's one area where the Spurs and specifically the NBA have done a really good job of listening to their players, listening to the family, and creating brands that react appropriately.
Can I jump in real quick here? I think what Becky says is so important, and what Jessica says is also very important too, because as a journalist, I keep thinking, what Becky brought up concerning, for example, the basketball team. I remember when Mark Cuban dealt with this toxic work environment and sexual harassment, right? So what did he do? He hired an African-American woman to head the whole thing, and then she reshaped everything. And that's a difficult job for a brand, because understand, women love basketball too. They buy those tickets too. And so, of course, as the journalist, we got to look at, okay, look what this brand did right away. Look what Mark Cuban did right away. And of course, it's a story. It's a Me Too story, right? The beauty about Jessica having her podcast is, if I'm doing a story about Latinos, and I love the saying you just said, we work the land, but we don't own the brand. Is that what you said, Jessica?
We not only work the lands, but we own the brands.
Right. She's a perfect example of someone that I would call and say, okay, you have a podcast that concentrates exactly on supporting and making sure Latinos don't forget their roots. Because meantime, you have the other side who is like, remember, they're Americans. I mean, being American more than a Mexican or whatever. And so the beauty of social justice when it concerns reporters is that we can tap into people like Becky and Jessica. This is where we find that balance. This is also where we find the weaknesses. For example, if there's let's say Mark Cuban does this with the Mavericks, but meantime, there's another team, another team that doesn't do anything about it, but it's happening. That's a story for us. We're constantly looking for those stories, but we also want the positive stories, like what Cuban did with the Mavericks. He knew it needed change, or if not, there was going to be, or was, a big backlash. So I'm glad we're talking about this issue.
Great.
Okay, well, so let's put this in like a student context here. Students are about to graduate. They're going to go out into these different industries, and they'll be working professionals. So what advice could you give them across all of your industries and the entrepreneurship to help them be prepared to address, advocate, or cover social justice issues?
Well, I think as a journalist, you have to realize you don't have to ignore your passion for Me Too, whether you support, these children coming into our country, whether you support Black Lives Matter. You don't have to not support it. You just cannot be someone who is the cheerleader in a story, especially if you work for a company. For example, Jessica, she runs her own business. She doesn't answer to a CEO. She doesn't answer to a news director. She doesn't answer to an assignment editor. When I worked at Fox, or I worked at the ABC station in Chicago, or I've worked for different stations, I had someone to answer to. Remember that. You answer to the boss. That's who you answer to. And even though you have, understand, again, I'm the daughter of immigrants. It is very difficult covering those stories, but I'm hired to do the balance in the story. So what I say to you now is, remember this: you can keep that passion in your heart. Okay, you can. There's no such thing. We all have biases. I have biases. I just have to be careful that I don't show them in my stories. And again, there are those jobs where you can give your opinion. The commentators, what I call the talking heads on TV, or even the opinion columnists, they get to say what they want. But remember, unless you pay your own bills and unless you are your own boss, you still answer to somebody else. And so that's the fine line. That's the fine line. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Rebecca, as your one question to maybe expound on in that, you've got what you need to do as a journalist working for that particular group. But on your time, in your own personal time, you probably have a Twitter and you probably have a Facebook and you probably have an Instagram. What's the line of demarcation as far as what you can do in your personal side with where that blends into being a journalist that's well known, or do they have to be one and the same, just to help? And Jessica, this may not be as applicable to you for yours, since again you own your own, but I know Becky, it's probably rings true for you, your own personal social media and how you balance that. I think that's something students are going to have to consider.
First of all, in the beginning, you have to get experience. So no matter how much you love Me Too, Black Lives Matters, kids and, against kids in cages, that kind of thing, first you need the experience. Anderson Cooper and Chris Cuomo, and even for that matter, probably Sean Hannity, didn't have the ability from the beginning just to say whatever they wanted. They had to earn their stripes. They had to work the streets. Cuomo was at local stations. Anderson Cooper, got a camera, went across to Africa and whatever. They earned their stripes. They earned their name. And so now they're allowed to say whatever they want because they've earned it. Very much like Jorge Ramos with Univision. He says whatever he wants, even though he's a journalist, right? So first, gain the experience. Go out there and see, okay, look at it. Know that you can go back to someone in the future and say, been there, done that. I've had the balance. So have I. I don't work for anybody now. I'm a freelancer. I can say whatever I want. But here's the thing. Even though, I'll go to these Me Too, different marches, but you won't see me taking pictures there with friends because I'm still a journalist. I'll be a journalist till the day I die. And sure, there's certain things that, for example, today on Twitter, I told people, please stop showing the faces of these children coming here from other countries. You don't know if cartels are looking for them. These are children who never had a voice. They're innocent. And there's a lot of people that don't understand that. So that doesn't mean I'm pro the people coming over. I'm just being a human and being compassionate. So in the beginning, I say to you people that are about to graduate, go get your feet wet. Go learn the business. Go learn how to be balanced. And then later on, in a few years, go start your own podcast or start your own blog. But in the beginning, I need to know as a journalist, and if you want to be one, that you know how to get the who, what, where, and when from both sides.
I think that's vitally important, what Rebecca is saying, to understand both sides of issues. But I will say too, to folks, don't compromise your personal values for any job. There is a line out there that is, you'll know it if you try, if someone is pushing you to cross that line, and that's not something that is ever worth any job. Mm-hmm. Understanding, of course, that we live in a polarized environment in a polarized country, and that presents a lot of challenges. One of the things I think is helpful is digging into what sort of organizational development your prospective employer offers. So one of the things that we do at the Spurs and that is required by the NBA is unconscious bias training. So we actually go through a process to uncover and define what is an unconscious bias, how do you spot those types of things, and how can you work to train your mind against those things. And I think that's really helpful. So it can be, digging into what areas your prospective employer is involved in and whether or not that aligns with your personal values, I think is really important. But yeah, I mean, and when you're in the work environment, ask tough questions and raise uncomfortable issues. I think especially important and probably, again, easier for me to say on the brand side of things, but if you disagree with your organization's position or the way that they're, treating a certain group of people or standing on an issue, it's important for all of our voices to be heard and to raise those things.
But Becky, can I ask a question? But there's one thing, I mean, you also have to, in your area, you also have to be careful on, because one of the things Trent said, well, what about, your personal Twitter and whatever, you also have to be careful. I mean, it's one thing what the Spurs think, but if you're over here going, oh my gosh, I think basketball players, and I'm just saying this as an example, basketball players, all they can do is play basketball. They're not very smart. In your personal Twitter, I mean, you also have to be careful in what you say in your personal Twitter, correct? Because it can come back and bite you on the behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's always the case with social media. People need to be very careful with what they share on social media. I happen to be incredibly lucky in that I work in an environment where I happen to agree with the majority, the vast majority of, the way my company approaches social justice and their focus on creating an environment that is diverse and inclusive and creates a culture of belonging. So it is important for folks to be aware of how their social media can be perceived, especially as you enter into the work environment. But I do think that, number one, it's important to be able to see all sides of an issue, and two, know where you stand on those issues personally.
I get the benefit of having both things, right? Because I've worked in PR, I've worked for quasi-government agencies like DART. I have a platform where I'm on my own with the podcast. So I've kind of been able to do both, and I've worked in nonprofit. And, this more than any other time, this generation wants to put everything out there. And as you see, things that you say when you're a teenager are coming back to bite people in the butt. For example, look what happened with the Teen Vogue editor-in-chief. She just had to resign for things that she said when she was 17. Now, do I think that's right? You're a different person when you're 17 than you are when you're in your 30s, obviously. But I think that we have to continue to be careful. I would always tell, when I worked at a nonprofit, I would always tell the kids, you need to watch what you're doing on Twitter. It's going to come back. It's going to come back. Whatever you put on social media, even if you erase it, if somebody does a screen capture, it's there forever. So it's so important that we continue to remember this because, because of my podcast, I do share a lot, but I am also I started the podcast because I had a very specific point of view in wanting to share voices and stories that come from communities of color. And so that is reflected on my social media as well. You will see me posting things about Black Lives Matter. You will see me post things about what's happening at the border. You will see me, but because that's what I stand for, and I'm able to say that. Now, if I were to go apply for another job, the first thing I'm going to do is find out what their stance is on issues that are important to me. Because if I go someplace where their values are completely different, I can't knowingly do a good job for them and support them knowing that our values are completely different. And a lot of times it's very easy. I think as students, you need to know that when you go into a job interview, you need to interview the job as much as they need to interview you. You need to ask questions. I think we forget, even as adults, like no matter what age, I think sometimes we forget that we need to interview the companies as much as they're interviewing us. And that includes digging into what they support, like where are those contributions going, and ask those questions. And if the person you're interviewing with doesn't know, then ask them to find out. Because if it's a place that you really want to work, you want to know that your values are going to align, because I guarantee you, if you know that they don't, that's going to affect your work performance.
And let me jump in real quick too. I want to say to the students watching this, nothing is private. I don't care how many handles on Twitter you have under, Happy Rebecca, or on Facebook where you have, Rebecca.
There's no such real thing as a Finsta. There's no real such thing as a Finsta.
The thing is, you can have all the accounts you want, but if a reporter wants to find you and what you've said in the past, we're going to find it. One of the things I learned from some FBI forensic people, you have all these child molesters that try to, or, porno people that try to destroy things with children. Well, those FBI forensic people, even if they try to burn the computer, they're going to find it. So what I'm just saying is, no matter how many accounts you set up with some crazy name that's not yours, it will be found. Never think that just because I have a private Facebook, a private Snapchat, or even WhatsApp, don't think no one can find it. It can be found. It can be found. And this is why, for example, also, I'm glad you brought up the Teen Vogue, but what about lately, not that I watched The Bachelor, but because of the racial issue, there was a woman who was a contestant till the very end. And she had some inappropriate things that were on the edge of being racist from the past. And now I'm sure that her name is it's going to be out there forever. It will come back one way or another. If someone like a reporter doesn't out you, one of your former friends will, because this is what happened. This is what happened to the woman from that was on the Bachelor. Her friends that were in the photo outed her. So it will be found. Don't think nothing is private. If it's social media, it's social media. And when it comes to your post, I always say, think before you post. If you're angry, step away for 30 minutes and then come back. If you're drunk, close your phone. If it doesn't empower, if it doesn't engage, if it's not educational, don't post it. If it has any hate or racism, don't post. Because it will come back and ruin your career and ruin the name of your family. You don't want that. You're better than that. So that's my advice, because I've seen it so much, so much.
And Rebecca, I think that's great advice, even if it's not, even if it's something that you think you're putting out that's harmless. If you work in social media, especially for a brand, you got to be even more careful. There's been 1,000,005 different great examples of this. A couple that I can think of specifically in the sports industry a few years ago. And this was probably 10 or so years ago. So it's a dated reference, but bear with me. It's kind of a good example of this. The Dallas Stars were restarting their season and, coming out of the off season, going into starting the hockey season. And someone who worked for the Dallas Cowboys on their social team basically replied to a tweet from the Stars with something snarky like, "Who cares about hockey?" But they were actually signed into the Cowboys corporate account and not their personal account. The Stars handled it very well and came back with a really quippy, kind of snarky dig at the Cowboys team and said, "At least our number 9 got it done," with a photo of Mike Modano holding the Stanley Cup, which was a dig at Tony Romo and sort of a, playful back and forth with the brands. But that kind of stuff can happen entirely too easily. So always best to be, if you have, if it gives you pause before you hit post, it's probably not material you should be posting.
Yeah, I had a professor at my former institution that used to tell her students, if you don't want your grandmother to read it, don't post it. And so I thought that was appropriate. But I wanted to, jump off of what Jessica said. Some of the research that I do in crisis communication, it was one of the things that they're saying about consumers now is just what you said, Jessica, is they are looking at what do these brands believe in before I buy them, before I continue to, give them my patronage. And so, Becky, I wanted to ask you a question, because you talked, a little bit about, making sure that you believe in the organization. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about how, the NBA approached social justice as opposed to how the NFL approached social justice.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case study, and I'm happy to answer the question because I think it is important. It's an important case study to look at when you're creating a brand that has an authentic voice. And so the starkest difference, I think, between these two leagues is that the NBA is very much a player-driven league, meaning the players who are the stars and the workhorses of the league, like they carry the league, and the NBA is aware of that. And it's important to the NBA to amplify those voices of those players. And I think the NFL very much is a league-driven league. So it's important for the NFL to create the perception that the players are sort of falling in line with towing the company line, if you will. Whereas I think the NBA has created an environment where players are free to speak their mind and don't have repercussions for doing so for the most part. Within reason. We've just seen from the Miami Heat, one of their players had a racial slur, and he's been, fined by the league and released from the team. So I say that saying that, it's all within reason, but I think it's been hard too for the NBA. We have, as a team, the Spurs have created a very open stance on advocating for people of color, communities of color, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. We produced a series of videos that we're calling Spurs Voices, where we have players, staff members, members of our Spurs family share their experiences as people of color, both with, shortly after the George Floyd killing and most recently with Stop Asian Hate. And some of our fans haven't really been thrilled with that decision. And, that's okay. As a brand and as an organization, we have decided that it is more important to us to advocate for what we believe is right and just than it is for us to be everything to everyone. And again, I think that goes back to the shift from, quote unquote, cause marketing to authentic brand communication and defining and sticking to a set of values and communicating about those values. Cause marketing, I think, was an effort from brands to try to be everything to everyone and advocate for, oh, hey, do you like things that are good? Like, let's get a little deeper than that and actually stand up for things. So that's a long-winded way of answering that question.
People are very, very smart in figuring out if something is authentic or not. And they're going to sniff it out very, very quickly. So if you are doing like what Becky, you're saying, cause marketing, they're going to know, they're going to identify it. And people are not afraid to call brands out anymore. They're not afraid to say, like, what are you doing? Tagging them on social media, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, whatever, and sharing that their displeasure with those brands. So it's super important that whatever you're doing, it has to come from an authentic place, because people will quickly call you out and share it with their whole network.
And I applaud Becky and your organization. I mean, I really do, because while you get a lot of pushback from some fans, let me tell you, especially in communities of color, they notice. I have a group on Facebook called Why is Latinas Linked? We're about 9,000 Latinas. And let me just tell you, when we hear something on there that maybe is anti-Latino or something like your organization, like the Spurs doing something great about, your voice when it concerns social justice, we share it. And so that means these people are going to your website. The women from San Antonio suddenly go, you know what, let's go support them. Because especially with communities of color, because we have been ignored for so long, when we see brands understanding from our point of view, it just feels like it's finally a win. It's finally something where we have progressed instead of regress. And I think that is very important. And I applaud the Spurs, even though you get pushback. You have to also remember, you may not hear from the people that have often been conditioned to keep quiet. You may not hear from them saying, hey, thank you, but I'm sure it's out there. I'm really sure.
Yeah, and I have to applaud both our ownership and Commissioner Silver, who leads the NBA, for creating this environment where teams are encouraged to define and stick to their values. I think that's been a really nice, a great example of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. I think we answered kind of another question that was already on the table on accident. So we're going to go to the next one. A healthy work environment is a diverse and inclusive environment. So what advice would you give new student graduates who find themselves part of an organization that may not be as diverse as they would like?
I think do what, like Jessica said, you have to do your research. You know, I come from a background where news directors used to fly me in, okay? So first thing I look around is how many Latinos are in the newsroom. And then if there was maybe one, I'd go up to them and how do they treat you here? I would. You know, the news directors would let me go and I'm like, hey, can I just walk around? And I would ask them, hey, how are they treating you here? Then I would ask the other people of color. But the first thing I do is look around, and you don't have to be a person of color. What I love about many, and especially the generations of today, I hate to say this, but millennials and the generation, is it Z? Yeah. You know, I think what the generations of today is, they're very conscious of this. They look in the newsroom and go, hey, wait a minute, why are we just a bunch of white people? You know, where are the African Americans and the Latinos and the rest of the groups and the LGBTQ, even though it may not be that evident, right? That's the difference between the generations. And I think so it's so important that you look around and ask in your interview. Many times in an interview, I would ask, so am I replacing another Latina? And what happened to that person? Did you fire them or did they move on? Because as a reporter, I'm supposed to ask the tough questions, right? Why shouldn't I, from the person that wants to hire me? They should see that, well, she had the guts to ask me that question. Okay, all right. And so sometimes you have to ask the questions. You don't have to be brown. Ask them. So how many women work here? Okay. Even if you're a man, how many women? All right. How many people of color? Okay. Do we have any LGBTQ? And if they say, why are you asking all these questions? Well, you know, you want a good PR person, right? I would ask the questions. You want a good marketing person, right? I'm gonna ask the questions. And if you want a damn good reporter, they're gonna ask questions. So don't be afraid. Always be the person that you're unafraid. Because remember, if you don't ask, they don't tell.
That's really good. And as you guys are answering this question, think about it also from the standpoint of a lot of organizations are trying to diversify. So they may not have people, they may have like one. And again, you can talk to that person, but if you are the first, should that be scary? Should that be an opportunity? How should they be kind of thinking about, man, this organization is not diverse, but they want to be, and they're starting perhaps with me. And how should I think about that perspective? Yeah,
I think, first of all, I agree. I have not ever gone in asking the question. I usually do my research on an organization, and on LinkedIn is a really good place because if somebody works there and they're listed, I go to see all of who their employees are to see what their diversity is and everything. So I'm already kind of a little bit aware from the back end by researching through LinkedIn. And then I go to their website and I see who their leadership is. And we're all, you guys are all coming from the Mayborn School of Journalism. So regardless of what your concentration is, you're learning how to research. So this is a really good time to use that skill to research these companies and who's working there. And and this is what I've done. I've followed people, or I've looked at people's social media. What are they talking about? Who are they following? Like, I will definitely do the digging for sure. But when you're somebody who's oftentimes, even now, I go into rooms where when it comes to wine, like many of us within the Latino community, we don't grow up with wine. We don't know anything about wine. We grew up with beer and tequila or other liquor, but wine. So oftentimes I am the only Latina in these wine conversations. Mm-hmm. So I am not scared, which it can be scary because I'm still learning about wine, but I know my community. And that's where you have to be secure in. You may not know everything about this, but you know yourself and you know your community. And I don't represent the entire Latino community because the way I grew up is very different than the way Rebecca grew up and the way anybody else. We all have our own experiences. But I do know my community, and what I can do is bring my perspective and my point of view in regards to how to better be an ally, not to a particular community. And so you have to just be very self-assured in yourself and ask those questions like, what are you looking for? I notice you want to be more diverse. So what exactly are you looking for in regards to that? It's not you don't want to come off defensive. You want to come off as you really want to know. How can you help them? How can you help that company be empowered to be an ally to different communities of color?
I think that's awesome advice. And I want to have a glass of wine with Jessica at some point. I'm a huge wine nerd, so we got to talk wine offline. This is wrapped.
Absolutely. Oh, girl, I was already, my wheels were already turning when it came to you.
And I don't have this perspective as a person of color, but certainly as a woman who works in professional sports, I often find myself as the only one that looks like me in a room. And it can be a daunting position to be in. And it sometimes seems a little bit more daunting the longer that goes, right? I mean, I'm well into my career now, and the fact that I look around and I still am among a minority when, you know, what I am is 50% of the population identify, you know, as female. I would say it's really important for you to find not just your support group within the organization, but also outside of the organization, and to sort of build up your personal Mount Rushmore of people who you can go to for advice or feedback, guidance, and to help you create sort of a self-sustaining well of self-confidence that you can pull from. Because as Jessica alluded to, that confidence is really important, but it can be hard to maintain that when you're one of the only, you know, one of one in a room. Because it's scary sometimes, you know. I wish that I had better advice on that, but I think it's important to find those renewable sources of confidence. And then as you progress in your career, and you think about the ability to bring on additional people, I think it's vitally important to hire folks that don't look like you, you know, to have people on a team. If you're in a position where you're making hiring decisions and you're building teams of people, there is no real benefit that can come from a homogenous team. Having different perspectives, different voices, different opinions, different demographics, different everything is only going to make your team stronger. So that's, you know, an area of impact that I think is really important.
And it's so key to find mentors right now. You know, find mentors who tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Your parents will tell you what you want to hear. You're doing great work. You look beautiful. I love you, blah, blah, blah. You need mentors who can tell you the good, bad, and ugly. And yes, they're going to make you cry sometimes. And yes, they will talk you off the ledge too. You need to find mentors who are doing the job you want to do. I'm not going to go, I love Becky, love meeting her, but I'm not going to make her my mentor. I probably would have someone like her eventually, but if I want her job, if I want to do that dream job that she has right now, that's what I want as a mentor. If you want to be a reporter, you want to find a reporter. If you want to be a podcaster, you know, have someone like with Jessica's background in there, but find a mentor. Find someone. I also say find a mentor that's a man. I like to have a man and a woman, because a man, you know, in the TV business, a woman could tell me, Rebecca, you need to shed some pounds because, you know, this business, 10 pounds heavier. But if a man says it, it could be, you know, it wouldn't be right. But I also think a man has a different perspective. I also think that if you're a person of color, your mentor should be at least one person of color and one white person, because they, again, see it through a different lens. You know, I mean, I've had some great advice. My mentors, one was an African-American and one was a white male. And they would tell me their perspectives on different things. And in the end, I would come up with my own conclusion. But I had both perspectives, and that's important. But these people were ruthless sometimes. Like Rebecca, that live shot sucked. Okay, it really sucked. You need to get better. And it would be, but they were doing it because I've been able to succeed and get to this point in my career and still be happy, because they told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. So that is my big, big, big recommendation. Please find a mentor now. And if you don't know how, you know, like I said, ask, call, you know, message Becky and say, hey, you know, I'd like some guidance. She could say, I don't have time, or she could say, I do have time, or I have someone better for you, and move it on. Find organizations on Facebook where, you know, like I have Latinas in journalism. That's where a lot of Latinas find other Latinas who are, you know, that are doing the job we are doing today. But find a mentor. Find a mentor. It is so key today.
Rebecca, I hope your male colleagues, if anybody ever told you to lose 10 pounds, I hope your male colleagues were also
No, one woman did call me one time and she said, well, a viewer in Dallas called me like, I need to tell you this, Rebecca. I love you. I was like, well, thanks. She goes, but you're fat. You're getting fat. And I was like, okay, thank you. And then I said, well, maybe next month it'll be better because I'm gonna, I am 8 months pregnant. And she's like, oh, I didn't know. And I was like, yeah. So yeah, they get nasty, but it's okay. No big deal.
Yeah, that was, y'all took my question because that was my next question about finding a mentor. So we're all on the same wavelength here. But as we start to get the end here, I want to broaden it a little bit and ask everyone kind of your best piece of professional advice that you have ever gotten from someone. So perhaps it was from a mentor, a professor, whatever, whoever it may be, and share that, pass that along to our students today. Jessica, you want to start?
Ooh, I've gotten so much good advice over the years, so it's hard to say like what was my best, like what's the best advice I have ever gotten. I mean, I kind of go with the adage of the answer is always no if you don't ask the question. That's kind of how I live my life, because if you don't ask the question, how do you know? If you don't ask somebody to be a mentor, the answer is automatically no. If you don't ask for a job, if you don't ask for a pay raise, if you don't ask for all of these things, the answer is automatically no. And you're not by asking and getting a no, you're not any worse off than you were before. So there's really no downside to just asking the question. I think we paralyze ourselves with the fear, and sometimes just asking the question gets us through the fear and can get us through that paralyzed phase. So that's what I would say. The answer is always no if you don't ask the question.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that and say, somebody once told me, like, I'm a known perfectionist, like I'm a super type A personality, and I have this really bad habit of sort of striving for perfection. So really good advice was two things. One, don't let perfect stand in the way of good, and be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like Jessica said, like it may be uncomfortable to go advocate for yourself and ask for a raise, or advocate for yourself and ask for a promotion. But that moment of uncomfortableness will pass. And what you're left with is, one, the knowledge that you were able to do that you mustered up the courage and the strength to pull yourself into that meeting and advocate for yourself. And two, you may get the raise, you may get the promotion, but you never, you may not have known that if you didn't ask. And I think too often people who are against the status quo are conditioned to accept less and then told to be thankful for what they do have. And I think that needs to change. So
my main thing is don't be selfish. And that means be giving with your time. Remember you were an intern. Don't be selfish. Help other interns. Remember when you got fired. Don't be selfish. Help that person. Remember when you got laid off. Don't be selfish. Reach out. Remember when you got a scholarship. Don't be selfish. Help other people get a scholarship. Remember that there was always someone there to stand up for you behind closed doors. Don't be selfish. Remember when you get that great assignment. Maybe you've had too many great assignments. Don't be selfish. Pass it along to the other person. Because let me tell you, I've survived this long. I'm a happy person because I am not a selfish person. I am not a selfish person. I don't ask for a dime for advice. I help women and people of color all the time. I'm constantly volunteering. And you can't imagine how many doors have opened for me because I'm not selfish. So don't be selfish. And keep your ego out of it. Thank you.
The final thing I would like to add is don't forget who you are, because I think that's so important. It can be really easy to find yourself lost in a job or lost in whatever is going on, but you have to kind of keep centered to who you are. Because if you don't, you might look back and be like, where did I make that wrong turn, or where do I do this? And I think that's a lot of kind of combining everything that we've said, of not being selfish, of wanting to look for mentors and wanting growth and all of these other things. So ultimately, don't lose sight of who you are and why you want to do the work that you want to do.
That's great. Dean, do you have any other questions? You guys were starting to cover stuff we hadn't even answered.
I know, it's awesome. I didn't know if any of our students who are online would like to unmute themselves and ask a question. There's only 3 of you, no pressure, but we would love to hear from you.
Becky, I was going to ask, how did you get into the sports industry? Because that is actually something I would like to do. I currently have a podcast with friends and we talk about sports, all that good stuff. And I just would love to be in your shoes one day. So
I love that. I'm thrilled to hear that you have an interest in sports. I think it can be a really rewarding career. I got into this industry in a little bit of a non-traditional way. So I was working at an agency, and the agency that I worked for primarily handled political consultants, folks who were running for office. So we were responsible for making all of those terrible, horrible ads that people fast forward through. And part of what we did was also nimble crisis communications consulting. Unfortunately, with politics, crisis communication and politics go hand in hand a lot of times. And the Cowboys became a client of our agency as they were building the new stadium, which is not new anymore, kind of dating myself here. They were opening AT&T Stadium back in 2009 and needed some help selling season tickets. So they reached out to us because we had that nimble agency background and could kind of spin up a campaign in a hurry. So we worked with the Cowboys on season ticket sales campaign. And as soon as they came across my desk as a client, I sort of had this realization that I no longer wanted to work in politics. And I'd been thinking about that for quite a while. It's a polarizing industry, to say the least. And I had always been a passionate sports fan like yourself, and thought that was an industry that I wanted to get into. And so I worked with the Cowboys on the agency side for a couple of years, and the entire time was sort of dropping these hints that they needed a marketing person in-house, that they could save a lot of money on agency fees if they were to consider setting up a full-time role. And I think I would be the perfect person to take that role. So it took a couple of years for me to convince them that I needed to go work for them on the team side, but that was how I got my foot in the door.
And Julia, just so you know, don't go into sports if you're looking for the money. Because I've worked for Super Bowl, I've worked in hockey, I've worked in sports as well. And especially during season, and Becky, I know, like when you're working during the season, you're working 60, 70 hours a week sometimes, and you're not getting paid anything extra. So just so you know.
Yeah,
I never even thought about the money. I never even thought about the money aspect of it. I just thought I just enjoy it so much. Yeah.
It's true. It's not, an industry that's known to pay big bucks to,
But NBA pays the best.
I'm not sure about that. I've never actually looked at the salary data, but that'd be an interesting thing to dig into. Julia, I'm happy to connect. Please feel free to find me on LinkedIn and send me a note, and we can have that conversation on a deeper level.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. Anybody else? Michael or Jose, any questions?
I have to leave for a 2 o'clock, but I just wanted to thank you all. As a young queer journalist, this was really insightful. I've been finding myself doubting what I can do, and as a queer person in the world in general, and it was very reassuring to just hear your experiences. So thank you.
Well, Michael, never give up. There's a position for you. You just don't see the doors yet, but they're there. They're there to be open. And there's always a job, always. I mean, people may be losing their jobs right now, especially in journalism, but believe me, there's jobs out there for people of all backgrounds, which is important. But never give up hope, and feel free to connect with me on Twitter or wherever you want to find me, because I know they're out there. But I know that sometimes, especially as students, you're trying to find that first job. I always say, sooner or later, someone will say yes. You just don't see that door yet, but it's there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for being here. I thought this was a really great conversation. I'm really excited to share this again on our social media with the recording, and it'll be sent to all the people who participated today as well. Thank you again to Rebecca and Becky and Jessica. This was an excellent opportunity, and thank you to Andrea Miller, who stepped in to help moderate today as well. But thank you again. And with that, we'll close up the 4th episode of the Mayborn Mentors in the spring. Thank you.
Bye.
See you all next time.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.